Do we live in a broken world? Is Saturn a malefic planet that governs negativity, corruption, and imprisoning decay, the demiurge and the god of our world? Let's find out. I am Saturn's Return, and this is KYTT time. My conversation with Gemini today begins with me asking, highly esteemed astrological magician Clifford Hartley Lowe, in his Convocation 2019 lecture, Magical Medicine, at 57 minutes 26 of this video, said, and if you understand how the zodiac works and how astrology works, you might think that a perfect balance of the planets would be optimal for your health. That's not what Marsilio Ficino believed. He believed that 2 of the planets were really bad for your health, and 2 or 3 of them were really good for your health. And the reason is actually a core of his philosophy. He believed the universe was slightly broken, and the result of it was that we were mortal. This was the result of Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden and the curse upon mankind of our mortality and our toil. The result was that the planets projected rays and energies which were disruptive to health and caused our mortality. And it wasn't merely the effects of Mars and Saturn which caused mortality, but general imbalance between the planets. The symmetry of the planets was disrupted at the beginning of the mortal era. Are there specific citations from Ficino that support this claim? Did Ficino actually say something like this? Gemini responds. The short answer is yes. Clifford Hartley Lowe's commentary is a highly accurate characterization of Marsilio Ficino's medical philosophy. While the exact phrasing of the universe is slightly broken or the mortal era reflects Lowe's modern lecturing style, the underlying core concepts map directly onto Ficino's seminal 1489 work, De Vita Libri Tres, 3 books on life, specifically Book 3, on obtaining life from the heavens. The specific claims can be broken down and matched to Ficino's actual text and theological framework through the following points. 1. 2 bad planets versus 2 or 3 good ones. Lowe mentions that Ficino believed 2 planets were inherently detrimental to physical health, while 2 or 3 were highly beneficial. In De Vita, Ficino explicitly builds upon the traditional Ptolemaic and Arabic astrological classifications of planetary qualities. The malefics, the 2 bad planets. Ficino identifies Saturn and Mars as planets that naturally disrupt human health. Mars burns up the bodily humors with furious, excessive heat, while Saturn freezes and dries them out, leading to heavy, earthy, black bile, melancholy. Ficino, who famously struggled with intense melancholy himself, frequently laments Saturn's heavy, oppressive impact on the physical body. The benefics, the good planets. Ficino singles out Jupiter and Venus as the primary life-giving, well-tempered planets, often adding the Sun as the 3rd crucial source of vital spirit, spiritus. In De Vita 3.2, he writes that to stay healthy, a magician or physician must actively capture the rays of the 3 graces, the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus, to counteract the harsh, drying, and destructive influences of the malefics. 2. The fall of Adam and Eve and the loss of perfect balance. Lowe notes that according to Ficino, a perfect planetary balance would be optimal, but our current cosmos prevents it due to the fall of mankind. This is a cornerstone of Renaissance Christian Platonic medicine. In the original unfallen state of paradise, humanity possessed a perfectly balanced humoral composition. Because the humors were in complete symmetrical equilibrium, early humanity was immune to disease and immortal. However, the original sin of Adam and Eve shattered this perfect internal and cosmic symmetry. The fall resulted in a spiritual and physical corruption. In the fallen sublunary world we now inhabit, it is physically impossible for a human being to maintain a perfect, equal balance of all four humors, or all planetary influences. One humor or planet always holds dominance, tilting us towards illness, aging, and eventually death. 3. The universe as slightly broken and astromedical mitigation. Lowe explains that because the universe's symmetry was disrupted, planetary rays project disruptive energies that cause our mortality and toil. Ficino treats the physical, visible cosmos as a beautiful but inherently flawed reflection of the perfect immaterial divine ideas. Because material creation is subject to time, division, and decay, the planetary rays crossing through the material world constantly clash. Ficino's entire purpose in writing De Vita is to provide a medical toolkit to survive this broken system. Since we can no longer achieve a perfect, pristine balance of all the planets due to our fallen condition, Ficino explicitly advises against seeking a flat, equal symmetry. Instead, he teaches that we must deliberately skew our exposure away from the destructive planets of Saturn and Mars and heavily load our diet, music, garments, and talismans with the frequencies of the life-sustaining planets, Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun. By leaning heavily into the jovial and solar rays, a scholar or physician can offset the cosmic imbalance inherited from the fall, artificially extending their lifespan and mitigating the toil and mortality of the current era. I respond, okay, now you said by leaning heavily into the jovial and solar rays, a scholar or physician can offset the cosmic imbalance inherited from the fall. This seems to imply a malefic bias to our world, like things generally tend towards the excess melancholy of Saturn or the excess choler of Mars, as to be remedied by the temperate influences of the choleric Sun and sanguine Jupiter. Is this really what Ficino was getting at, though? Is there any quote in De Vita that suggests that our world is broken in such a way as to tend towards the Saturnian or Martial? Or is it more like the balance of the planets in general produces health, and their imbalance creates highs and lows of health, highs in the solar and jovial dominant person, and lows in the Saturnian or Martial dominant person? Gemini replies, you have hit directly on the precise dividing line between traditional textbook Ptolemaic astrology and Marsilio Ficino's highly specific Neoplatonic Christian medical framework. Your second hypothesis is closer to standard, traditional medieval medicine. The idea that health is a shifting scale of balance, and different people simply have different planetary baseline configurations. However, Ficino absolutely believed there is a fundamental malefic bias built into the post-fall material world, specifically leaning towards the corrosive excesses of Saturn and Mars. To understand why Clifford Lowe and Ficino view our material world as structurally broken rather than just a neutral wheel of highs and lows, we have to look closely at the mechanics of De Vita Libri 3. 1. The post-fall structural reality, the world of toil. Ficino does not view the planetary rays as neutral entities operating in a pristine void. Our world, the sublunary sphere beneath the moon, is structurally damaged by the fall of man. In De Vita, Book 1 and Book 2, Ficino focuses intensely on the physical toll of existence. He explains that before the fall, the human body possessed a pristine, perfect symmetry of the humors, which made it immortal. The moment humanity was cast out of Eden, we were bound to a material world governed by time, friction, and decay. Because we are forced to toil, as Lowe notes, the very act of living, thinking, and surviving burns up our life force. Ficino argues that this constant friction creates a natural systemic drag on human health, which manifests primarily as two things: the drying out of the body, Saturnian aging, or the inflammation of the spirit, Martial burnout. 2. Why the world naturally slopes towards Saturn and Mars. Ficino explicitly teaches that the material world is a place where things naturally fall apart. In the cosmic hierarchy, Saturn and Mars are the edges of destruction. Saturn represents extreme cold and dryness, the literal freezing and petrification of life force into heavy, dense black bile, melancholy. Mars represents extreme sharp heat and dryness, the burning up, consuming, and frying of the vital spirit into yellow bile, choler. Ficino points out that left to its own devices, a material body naturally dries out as it ages. Aging is a literal slow progression into the cold, dry domain of Saturn. Furthermore, for the very people Ficino is writing for, scholars, philosophers, and priests, the risk is doubled. Ficino writes in De Vita that the intense mental focus required for study uses up the finest, most volatile parts of the human spirit. What is left behind when that spirit is consumed? A dense, cold, heavy sediment, black bile. Therefore, our world has a natural slope towards Saturnian melancholy. The universe is broken because the life-giving, temperate balance is fragile, while the forces of decay, the malefics, are aggressive and constant. 3. The remedy. Why we don't seek perfect symmetry. If the world were simply a neutral wheel where a balance of all planets equaled health, a physician would try to invoke equal amounts of Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun. Ficino vehemently warns against this. In De Vita Book 3, chapters 2 and 11, Ficino explains that because we live in a fallen, vulnerable state, trying to balance all planetary energies perfectly is a death sentence. If you invite a full balanced dose of Saturn or Mars into an already decaying post-fall physical body, they will overwhelm your fragile life force. Instead, Ficino argues that the true counterweight to our broken material reality is to bias our lives heavily towards the planets that actively resist decay. De Vita Coletis Comparanda, 3:11. Since Saturn and Mars, this is a quote from Ficino, since Saturn and Mars are naturally hostile to the human spirit, we must turn our focus entirely to the three life-giving graces, the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus. Ficino describes Jupiter and the Sun not just as points on a scale, but as the active antidotes to the material world's structural decay. The Sun provides the vital life-giving heat, spiritus, that keeps the body from freezing into Saturnian death. Jupiter provides the moist, temperate, air-like quality, the sanguine that keeps the body from drying out. Summary: the wheel versus the slope. To answer your question directly, Ficino did not believe that the planets simply create highs and lows based on an individual's personal chart. He believed that all of humanity inhabits a fallen material world that naturally slopes downward into dryness, coldness, and decay of Saturn and Mars. Presumably then, mostly dryness, as Mars is quite hot. Because the cosmos is structurally disrupted, health cannot be found in a flat, symmetrical balance of all 7 planets. Health must be actively maintained by heavily leaning into the jovial and solar rays, using them as an intentional, artificial uphill force to keep us from sliding down into the malefic gravity of our post-fall reality. This is precisely what Clifford Lowe meant when he argued that Ficino viewed the universe's symmetry as disrupted, requiring us to actively choose good planets over bad ones to survive our mortality. And that's the end of Gemini's response. Reading this made me want to go back to a text post, particularly an image, a screenshot that I had captured that I had posted on my community section, which is a response to a certain commenter on another person's channel. This commenter asks, would you consider that Saturn is Yalda? And they're referring to Yaldabaoth, the demiurge. There's so much Saturn symbolism and imagery in the entertainment industry, and I know there's theories that it was the original sun and the atmosphere of Earth was very different and not polarized weather with a blazing hot sun. I'm not saying it's true, just theories I've seen. That's what they ask. Okay, now I respond, the 7 traditional planets are more or less Yaldabaoth, aka the demiurge. In Gnosticism, they were considered the demiurge's jailers, but really they're just fragmentations of its various facets. If the demiurge was just Saturn, it would only really be able to express its influence in harmful ways for the most part, as Saturn is a malefic. But in reality, the demiurge is a successful jailer precisely because it can break you down destructively, malefic Saturn and Mars, and then restore and heal you, benefics Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun, in a more worldly way. Yes, to restore and heal you in a more worldly way. If someone has a particularly challenging life, archons, in Michael Newton's work, The Council of Wise Beings, will likely attempt to reimburse you with an easier or more positive life the next time by giving benefics a more pronounced role in your next reincarnation's birth chart. Not enough to stop looshing, but enough to keep you on the hook, worldly and reincarnating. The 3 outer planets are Yaldabaoth poison and enemies of worldliness, particularly threatening to the demiurge is Uranus, which is a cycle breaker, disruptor, liberator, and rebel. And Pluto is a cord cutter which severs connections to things, including the solar system. But to your question, no, Saturn isn't the Yaldabaoth or demiurge. All 7 traditional planets are. Now, that was my reply to a commenter. But this thing I've just read seems to be kind of in a little bit of contrast somehow with the bulk of this video, which was talking about how there is actually a malefic bias to our world. And really, I think kind of what I'd like to achieve with this video is to kind of break down how these things aren't actually incompatible conclusions. These are actually both totally true. And I think really what brings it all together, because frankly, upon reflection, I find myself agreeing with this opinion of Ficino's, of this sort of malefic bias to our world. But then I don't know if I would necessarily call it the world itself having this quality. What I find everywhere I look is I find cycles inside of cycles inside of cycles. We could particularly see that again with our Time Lords, right? Is that you can have a level 1 zodiacal releasing period that is malefic, right? And that is the case with me. For pretty much my entire life, and it's going to continue to be that way until I'm like 57 or something. My level 1 Time Lords is Saturn, as my level 1 for most of my life was Capricorn, and the zodiacal releasing from the Lot of Fortune. And then after that, now I'm in Aquarius, still again Saturn. But still, I enter benefic period. In fact, in just 3 weeks, I'm going to be entering my level 2 and my level 3 and my level 4 all at the same time, Taurus, which of course is ruled by Venus, which is benefic. So we're observing the cycles inside of cycles, right? I'm entering a benefic, a positive period, but it's within the greater context of a bigger malefic period. So the Time Lords are inside of Time Lords inside of Time Lords, right? My Time Lord is going to be Venus, yeah, but it's within the context of a greater Time Lord, which is Saturn, which has a negative malefic bias towards my life. And so I don't think this is just, again, the natal, your natal fortune. I don't think it's just limited to that. I think this is represented in every level of reality. I think every level of reality is cycles inside of cycles inside of cycles. And I've talked about this in previous videos, how cycles are basically the result of the indistinct unity of the one or the monad passing into a primordial darkness, which is an emptiness. So in other words, Plotinus describes the one not as emptiness, but as like hyper-existential fullness. So it's like complete fullness. And also Kabbalah describes it this way as well. Kabbalah describes the Ein Sof as fullness that's so complete that it can appear as emptiness, right? It can appear as a void because you're blinded. You're blinded by how full this light is, how full and complete. It's so full and so blinding that it can appear almost as complete darkness. But then that is not to be conflated with this other thing, which is this primordial sort of darkness, this emptiness from which the one emerges out into. This entire world and all the 10,000 things, as the Tao Te Ching says, seems to absolutely be the result of absolute fullness encountering absolute emptiness. And that gives us 10,000 things. But the thing is, when we have the absolute fullness entering into this emptiness, of course we get fragmentation, but the fullness is never lost. And that's really one of the great mysteries of our world, is that the fullness never actually is lost. There's no diminishment. There's no reduction in the fullness or in the completeness. It's just buffered. And among other reasons why I kind of associate Saturn as kind of being like an ambassador of the primordial darkness, is that it has everything to do with time and delay, resistance, restriction, inertia, you know? Cycles work by this absolute fullness being buffered to where different elements of its being can be experienced in sequence. And so that's how we get this sort of Ouroboros. That's how we get this snake chasing its own tail, is that everything inevitably tries to move back to a fullness. Everything inevitably tries to move back towards a state of completion. But when that endeavor of moving towards completeness or fullness is undertaken in the world of outwardness, whenever you look into outwardness, you're moving in the direction of primordial darkness, which itself has this buffering effect. Essentially, you're kind of adding delay to the process by which you return back to the next part, which brings you closer to fullness. So in a sense, you're kind of, by virtue of the delay, you're actually moving further away from that sort of completeness. I mean, the completeness is always there, but the cycles become more cyclical, you know, the more further you venture out. And so, yeah, it's cycles inside of cycles inside of cycles, all as a consequence of absolute fullness moving into absolute emptiness, and completion or elements of creation trying to find their way back to completion by trying to encounter the next part of the one to come back into a oneness. So it's literally cycles inside of cycles inside of cycles. So we can see, based off of sort of the baseline of our world, of what our world is, we can see very clearly how Saturn and Jupiter, and as we generally practice it in our astrology, most forms of astrology, they seem to be equally balanced. I would say that let's say somebody makes a super benefic Jupiter talisman, and then someone makes sort of a malefic Saturn talisman. I think they'll generally kind of be equal. Maybe not even look there. Let's look at the transits of the planets. I mean, this is what I find. I find that that when Jupiter and Venus come around, great things happen. And when Saturn and Mars come around, bad things happen, and it's kind of in equal measure. But I think what we have to look at, though, is the baseline at which these things are taking place. So in other words, we live in a world where everything dies, everything's mortal. We have to we live in hunger and a state of constant need to survive. You know, things have to kill and eat each other. This is not good, and in fact, this is not balanced. But with that as the baseline, if we understand that that's just what our world is, within that context, good and bad things still happen, right? So Jupiter and Saturn are still balanced, but it seems that it's part of a larger cycle. In the same way that my level 2 zodiacal releasing is within the context of that level 1 malefic period. So it seems that, let's say, people have said that like Satan is the god of this world, or you might say Saturn is Satan, Saturn is the god of this world. And I think is where you get this association with the demiurge. I mean, you can kind of see baked into the structure of our reality many Saturnian things. But I think it's a mistake to just say our world, because this is a point that I really try to make as much as I can for people to understand. There is no such thing as a permanent ruler. There is no such thing as a king of kings. People like to say that Yahweh is the king of kings. There is no king of kings. No king rules forever. This is absolutely a fact. Because anything that exists within creation is subject to cycles. And cycles by their nature are an ebb and flow, are rise and fall. And so different aspects of reality become the dominant force, the dominant ruler of that period of time. We could see it everywhere. We could see it like Venus becoming really powerful. Let's say Venus enters Pisces, yeah? And let's say Mars kind of enters sort of like a weaker position. Let's say like Mars enters like say Cancer. Mars in Cancer is a pitifully weak Mars. Now Venus is really dominant. Venus kind of dominates our reality. So ultimately, at all levels of reality, our world may be dominated by malefic forces right now, but it can never remain that way. Nothing can ever remain. Nothing can ever remain. We can kind of see this by just the nature of the outer planets. All of these inner planets, these traditional 7 planets, they like to rule things. They like to be kings and rulers. This is how most of our traditional astrology works, is we go off of the lords of houses. Like if a sign is in a particular house, you look at the ruler of that sign, and that ruler, that planet that rules that sign that's in that house is considered to be a representative of the affairs of that house. And our world is made up of the affairs of all houses. So essentially there's something intrinsically worldly about the traditional planets. They like to rule elements of the world, which is why they like to be lords of houses. They like to be kings. They like to be rulers. But the outer planets don't participate in this game. You cannot use Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto as a house lord. It'll never work. It'll never give you any accuracy. Because those planets are all about release from the bonds of worldliness. And they none of these planets have anything to do with kingdoms. In fact, Uranus has everything to do with the fall of kingdoms, has everything to do with rebellion, has everything to do with revolution. Revolution is the changing. Revolution is the force that creates revolving, creates cycles. It's what creates change. Pluto, of course, governs evolution and transformation. So you can kind of see this this antipathy between Saturn and really all the traditional planets, with the outer planets is that these planets want to remain kings. They want to remain rulers of elements of the world. They're intrinsically worldly. They love governing. This is the inherent difference between the quality of these gods, these traditional planets, and the outer planets. The traditional planets are very concerned with what's going on in the world. They like to look down on the world, and they like to see their influence on the world. They like to have their influence spread in the world. That's why they're very responsive to being sold as talismans, astrological talismans. They are. This has been the opinion of many astrological magicians, is that the reason these spirits of the planets are so receptive to being taking part as part of a talisman is that their influence is going to be spread. And ultimately, it's what these planets want, is that they want to participate in reality. They want to participate in the world. But they want to establish a foothold in the world. They want to find their place in the world. But the outer planets, they seek to be placeless. They seek to have no place. They seek for places and kingdoms to be upended. They seek for change. They seek for movement towards completion. Much of the forces that govern this movement towards completion are not just the outer planets, but the principles governing them. Because we talked about in previous videos, it's not just as above, so below with regard to the microcosm of us and our world to the planets. The planets themselves are a microcosm to higher levels of higher principles of reality, what some in like a Platonic or Neoplatonic framework call the divine ideas. In fact, there was a text post I did recently that quotes a section from Christopher Warnock, my astrology teacher's course. And let me see if I can find that. I can't remember if it was, yeah, it was a text post. Yeah, here it is. Where is it? All right, just give me a moment, people. Why can't Control F work, dude? It's so annoying. All right, I'm just going to open all the read mores on all of my... There we go. Nope, that's another one. Okay, here we are. Yeah. Okay. So, to quote my teacher, Christopher Warnock, first we begin with the concept of the three worlds. 1 is intellectual and angelic. 2 is celestial. And 3 is material. As astrologers and astrological magicians, our focus will be on the celestial as we seek to understand and affect the material. But we must not lose sight of the primacy of the intellectual and angelic world, the world of the divine. The divine world contains all of the basic ideas of all things in the lower worlds. This is the world of universals, fatherhood or justice, for example. In the material world, we see individual fathers and sons or particular acts of justice. By observing these individuals, we can come to some understanding of the quality that all fathers have. The celestial world of the stars and planets is the essential link between the divine and the material worlds. In the zodiac, we see the essential archetypes of the generation and decay of all things in the material world. Right, so it's not just about the planets. The planets are just ambassadors of higher principles. Which is why I say that, like, to look into the eyes of Saturn is to look into the eyes of the anti-God. There's not just a benevolent, all-loving God. That's not a real thing. There is a benevolent, all-loving God, and there's an equally present anti-God. And this anti-God that some people call Satan, but it's not Satan as it's understood in a Christian context, because in a Christian context, Satan is kind of just God's bitch, and God lets him do things sometimes. I'm talking about an equally powerful um, anti-God and benevolent God. And these really what they are is these are the higher intellectual angelic principles, as Warnock puts it, behind the planets of Jupiter and Saturn. You can learn a lot by just looking at the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are three very important planets with regard to sort of light and darkness. This sort of like never-ending battle between the good and the bad, and desirable things and undesirable things, benevolence and malevolence, equality and hierarchy. This is Jupiter is somewhere between Jupiter and the Sun is what people understand Yahweh to be. The Sun really has a lot more to do with sort of the logos that kind of brings it all together. But if you just look at Jupiter and Saturn, you see a lot of this Christian depiction of good versus evil. But what I find far more fascinating are the higher principles behind the planets. The planets, again, are just a bridge. They're just a link between the material world and this world of higher principles. So the higher principle behind Uranus is one where these sort of oppositions can be reconciled. There's a union of opposites, a conjunctio, as I've mentioned in previous videos. But I guess my point was, yes, we are seemingly in a world where an anti-God is kind of ruling, what some people call a demiurge. But the demiurge is not just present in our world. The demiurge is going to be present anywhere that you can possibly incarnate. Anywhere you can possibly incarnate, because in some degree, in some level of proportion, you're going to have these facets of the worldly God, which are the seven traditional planets. They're going to be presented, of course. I mean, we can just see, we've seen that other solar systems have different planets. They're not just all Moon, Mercury, Venus. But in some distribution, you're going to see these higher principles behind these planets represented. You are going to see a higher principle behind Saturn in any solar system, in any level of reality, anywhere you go. You are going to see a force of corruption, decay, loss, death. It basically has to exist. The mystery is how these imbalances can occur that can buffer the experience of their opposite. The opposites we can see even at our level of reality. Jupiter and Saturn are equally powerful, but it doesn't matter if they're equally powerful if they move through time, and then they have their periods of increase and decrease in strength. In and of themselves, they're equally powerful. But if we put Jupiter in Cancer and we put Saturn in Aries, Saturn will not be as strong as Jupiter. It won't. It just won't. And this is to say something of the principles that govern these planets, the principles behind these planets, that are represented at all levels of reality. But also, because there's a greater cycle governing this, that's ruled by a sort of malefic time lord, because we see Saturnian and martial elements represented in reality, there is indeed, as Ficino says, a malefic bias. But this ruler, this anti-God that's ruling our world, which some call the demiurge, I remember my point. I'll get back to that in a moment. Their reign has to be temporary because there is no permanence. That's what the outer planets teach us, is the futility of clinging in a world where there is no permanence, where the march towards completion must march on. The outer planets teach us to love not perishable things. And I think this is why Saturn is such a great initiator into the outer planets, like I've said a million times, is that Saturn brings things to ruin. Saturn brings things to loss and decay. In a manner of speaking, this is something that at all levels of reality is inescapable. There's nothing you can possibly find that will not be stripped from you. Because the anti-God exists. And the anti-God exists at all levels of creation. They may be in a more diminished state in certain areas of creation, but even that's temporary. Everything is moving back towards a state of completion, and therefore, let's say that you're one of these like New Agers, like we need to ascend to like 9D consciousness, where everything is beautiful and lovely, and we're immortal, and everything's so full of love and amazing and great, and you can do that. That is an option. But what I am telling you is there is something at the deepest level of your being that will seduce you eventually back into a realm like the one we live in now. It's because the desirable, the good elements of creation are just a fragment. And this logos, this inherent unity behind everything is a tug towards the other fragments. There is a tug towards the experience of completion. I think I talk about this in my Chosen One's completion video in some respect. This is a very big part of that Plutonic pull, the convergence back inward to a singularity, back towards the one. The one is the fullness. But you may not necessarily be moving back inwards. You may be moving outwards. But always that unity is there, and always the compulsion to unity is there. No matter where you go, it's completely inescapable. And so what you'll get quite often is looking for completeness in all the wrong places. Like I've said, when you're living in outwardness, when you're living in multiplicity, when you're living in the world, that completeness is just going to be an unconscious drive towards the experience of the fragments that you have become distant from. I hope that makes sense. To put it in simple terms, we'll just do the good and the bad elements of reality. If you spend a lot of time with the benevolent God, the loving God, the all-loving, all-accepting God, the all-loving and all-accepting God is a category. Think about that. It's a category. But just by giving it a description, you have produced the distinction that allows for the existence of a no accepting and no loving God. You know? This is why the highest level, the one, is beyond description. Is that in order for it to be one, it must be beyond description. Because if it was able to be subject to description, the description would immediately destroy its unity. I think I talked about this a lot in my last video. It was a narration of, I believe it was Tractate 9 of Ennead 6 of Plotinus Enneads, is that if there were to be any description, any definition of the one, like some people say that it's made up of love. It's something that a lot of people say it's made up of love. You can't say that. You can't say that that's what the one is. You can't say that's what source is. And this is what a lot of New Agers say, is that the New Age, that source is made up of so much love, so much acceptance. I feel it in my heart. Okay, now there's the problem. You've just said this about the source. Okay, you've just said this about the one. But by saying that the one has this characteristic, you have just created the possibility of a no loving, no accepting God. What you're interacting with, and this is something I assert very much, is that what a lot of people think source is, or what the one is, or what the monad is, what they've actually encountered is no higher than Jupiter. What they've really encountered is Jupiter. Jupiter has this egalitarian element. It does have this element of unity and community and forgiveness and love and law, making things work right. But this is not what the one is. The one cannot possibly be that, because if the one was this or that, its opposite could exist, and then it would no longer be one. You see? So, yeah, the question of is Saturn the demiurge? No. The compulsion to participate in creation. And what is creation? What is being? Being is multiplicity. The compulsion to experience multiplicity is the demiurge. That's something that's inside of all of us. The biases, the lenses that have a bias towards creation, that is the demiurge. That is the archons. That is every voice that you encounter when you die that seems to really strongly believe that reincarnation is a really good idea. That there's something that needs to be fixed, that if not something that needs to be fixed, there are new experiences to have, there is enrichment to be had. Every voice that you encounter when you die that says that reincarnation is a good idea, or to even participate in any level of reality, of creation, is a good idea. That's the demiurge. So no, it's not just Saturn. Saturn is harmful. Saturn is malefic. There are forces, and this is what I'm trying to tell you. The opposite of Saturn is Jupiter. And Jupiter has as much of a bias towards creation as Saturn does. Jupiter wants you to reincarnate. No, it's not just Saturn, this evil planet, wants to reincarnate you to extract your energy and to loose you. Jupiter wants you to reincarnate too. All these planets, for different reasons, all want you to reincarnate. They all have a bias towards creation, bias towards a multiplicity of experience. But there's the negative side of these gods, let's say, that want you to experience creation, and then there's the positive sides. And they all work together with the desire to have you experience a multiplicity of different experiences is really all it wants. So, yeah, it seems that we are part of a greater cycle that has a malefic bias. That seems to be the nature of our world. But knowing the laws that govern all levels of reality, this is the most important thing, I think, that I teach on this channel, is studying the laws of all levels of reality. The laws that govern all levels of reality. One of those laws is that nothing can remain the same. Nothing can possibly ever remain the same. And all things move back towards the experience of completion. There's ultimately really only one choice to make, and like I said, there's only one lesson. That lesson, I say over and over again, is don't do drugs. What is drugs? Drugs is to choose to have pleasant experiences, knowing full well that you will have a hangover for whatever you have. In other words, drugs is participating in things that you know you will develop a level of attachment just by virtue of the sheer pleasantness of these things, knowing that there are forces of reality, an anti-God, that will strip these things that you have become attached to by its pleasantness from you, creating great suffering. The catch, though, is that all levels of being, all levels of creation consists of drugs by virtue of it not being a unity. It really just comes down to yin yang. If you participate in yin yang, you participate in a high and a low, you're doing drugs. The Earth School. We're here to learn lessons. Wrong. There's only one lesson. And that lesson is one. There's only one lesson, and that lesson is one. There's only one meaning of life, and the meaning of life is one. The meaning of life is found. It's immediately experienced and encountered when all levels of reality are recombined and resolved back into a unity. When you do that, when you encounter non-dual light, ask 60 Skills of Meditation how important it feels when you're in the presence of non-dual light. There's a sense of importance when you encounter non-dual light, when you encounter the one. That's the only thing that you can say about it. You can't say it's this, you can't say it's that, can't say it's good, can't say it's bad. But there is an implicit sense of meaning and importance that you feel when you encounter non-dual light. And so this is the only lesson, in my opinion, is that when you look outward for experience, rather I should say when you look outward for fullness and completeness, you experience fragmentation, which by virtue of its buffering of this meaning results in the experience of a diminishment of the experience of meaning. So everything that you will experience in outwardness has an intrinsic absurdity to it. The further you move from the one, the further you move from the core of being, the more absurd things become, the more seemingly divorced from meaning. It really is a diminishment of meaning because it's only a part of the whole. And the more you recombine these parts of the whole, the stronger this signal of meaning becomes. So I say the meaning of life is one. And the further from one, when you get to 10,000 things, now that meaning has been greatly dispersed, greatly, I'm going to say just fragmented. And of course, by living an experience of that, you are in a state of a diminishment of the experience of meaning. So yeah, we live in a fundamentally broken world with a malefic bias. But let this not attract you to worlds where to worlds that do not have this bias, and in fact have a bias towards the positive. Don't let that seduce you to that reality. This is what the soul trap people are trying to do. Let me break out of this negative reality. Let me break out of this prison world so I can go to a world that is sloped and slanted towards an excessively positive experience. That won't remain. You'll end up back here. and you will end up back in amnesia. This has a lot to do with my approach to magic. I could absolutely try to correct this imbalance, not just at the level of our world, but this broken world of ours, but at the level of my natal chart. Within the context of this broken world, people have different levels of fortune and misfortune. You could see that in the natal chart. I could correct both of these things. I could correct our broken world with a malefic bias, and I can correct my natal chart with a malefic bias by employing benefic planetary magic. But this all depends on what the objective of your life is. You can keep spinning around in these cycles. You can keep looking in outwardness for meaning and finding yourself hungrier and hungrier for a sense of completion because of your distance from it. Or you can use your experience here as the time in which you shift the polarity back towards inwardness and converge back inward and stop lusting for temporary things. There's only one eternal thing, and it is the one. Every other thing is impermanent. It's temporal, it's temporary, it has its time. And so it's not about thaumaturgy, it's not about sorcery, it's about theurgy. It's about reunion with the one. This is the only solution to this drug addiction. Drug addiction will never be a good outcome. And I'm telling you, all levels of creation are predicated upon drug addiction. And yep, I think that's all I have to say with this video. Hope it resonates with you. And I never know how to end these. Yeah, don't do drugs.